talks. And I'd like to thank one of our elected officials, Alderwoman Gussie Crawford, for coming tonight. I've got the next two green speaker talks lined up. They will be on beekeeping and permaculture. So they will be the third Thursdays of July and August. So help spread the word, please. There in the back, you'll see the laundry basket with cloth grocery bags. Feel free to take as many as you want. I've got a lot more at home. So that's your bribe for coming tonight. If you're not on my email list and would like to be, please see me afterwards and I'll take down your email address. Tonight's speaker is Tim Busse. He is the town architect at the new town at St. Charles. He's a member of the Congress for Urbanism and the American Institute of Architects, and he's very experienced architect, and he knows a lot about new urbanism. He's given many talks on the subject. Hundreds. Okay. So he'll talk for about 45 minutes and then have a 15-minute or so question and answer period. So please help me welcome Tim Busse.
Thank you so much for coming out on this beautiful evening, and I really appreciate your interest in being here. And in case I forget, I just want to invite all of you to come out to Newtown if you haven't been to Newtown. I'm also happy to lead groups, so you can come and have a kind of a tour of Newtown. We have, on the average, 2 to 3 groups a month come out to Newtown to study it. And we've had guests from as far away as Germany and China who come specifically to see the new urban principles that we have been following for the last almost 10 years. So again, thank you, and we'll get started. I'm an architect who has been licensed for 26 years. When I was first starting out, they said that you had to turn 50 to become what would be considered a mature architect. I just want to tell everybody that I just made that milestone, and so now I am a mature architect. Everything that I did before was totally new. And I have a lot of different hats because I'm interested in a lot of different things. But at the heart of what I'm interested in doing is I'm interested in building places that people can enjoy. That's the #1 thing. And if it happens to be a house or a patio or a park or a town, they all have the element of being a great place. I try to bring that to my projects. And so I work in a lot of different capacities. I am the principal of my own architecture firm with my wife. We're kind of a boutique, small firm, but I'm also the director of architecture for a really great firm in the city called H3 Studios. And H3 Studio is a primarily planning firm and interested in implementing the plans that they come up with. And they've done sustainability studies, they have done workshops where they brought people from the community together to kind of vision what those people would like in their community. They've done actually written zoning codes, and they've won a lot of awards for a lot of different things. It's really an honor to be part of the H3 Studio team. I also work for the homeowners of Newtown as town architect, and as town architect I'm going to talk a little bit down the road here in the presentation about what a town architect does. But I just want to give you a hint, and that is I keep the overall vision of what the designers had in mind and what everybody agreed to when we first started out building Newtown. And it's not so much keeping rules as keeping people true to that vision and to remind people of why Newtown was founded and why they came to Newtown. I'm also the town architect for the city of Darby Prairie in St. Charles, And that is a job that is just getting started, but they haven't really built their town center yet, but I will be part of that. And importantly, I was the former vice president and director of architecture for the development firm that built almost all of Newtown St. Charles. So I was responsible for about 95% of the architecture and come to architecture for the last 17 years with a developer's perspective, which means you have to really watch the dollars and cents, and you have to understand how things are going to get built, and I often work with people who are building my projects, so that's what I like to do. Let me close this. Sorry about that. I want to start out by saying a quote that many of you may be familiar with from Churchill. We shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us. And my comment to that would be that the same would be true for our communities. And so the quality of our community, I think, is directly affects the residents and the people who are living in the community. And most importantly, the children who are brought up in it. So with that, I'm going to plunge right into the question of what is new urbanism. And most of the next part of the talk comes directly from the Congress for New Urbanism website, the principles. So New Urbanism is interested in doing a number of different things on a big scale. One is they're interested in creating enduring neighborhoods and communities. And almost all my images in my talk come from Newtown. I'll tell you when they don't come from Newtown or when it's obvious. But this picture from Charleston is, in my mind, kind of the ideal example of what is an enduring community. When you go to Charleston, there are buildings that have lasted a couple hundred years or more. They have been loved, they have been taken care of, and they've created a place that is unlike any other place to be found anywhere. And I think that that's what New Urbanism is trying to accomplish in creating their principles. Part of what makes New Urbanism interesting is that over the course of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, conventional zoning codes have basically outlawed buildings that look like this and replaced them with kind of a sprawl type, big box, strip center, kind of an architecture of commerce as opposed to an architecture of place. This slide is a brand new community outside of Beaufort, South Carolina, called Fabersham. And many of the things in this slide cannot be built by in any conventionally zoned place in the country, much less in St. Louis.
How were they able to do it?
I'll tell you. That's a good question, but I will tell you because Newtown has the same changing of the rules. If you will, we'll talk about how those rules change. New Urbanism talks about making connections a priority, and that is a transportation grid, but also connections between residents and community members. So it seeks to bridge the gaps, as instead of having people isolated in their home, it seeks to build a community, and part of that is a commitment to a grid of streets, paths, and alternate forms of transportation that help knit a community together. That picture, by the way, was in Savannah. This is in Newtown. One of the other things is that New Urbanism celebrates shared spaces and the creation of spaces where the community can get together and enjoy being together. And this is from a beer tasting a few years ago in the courtyard in Newtown in their first neighborhood center. And then we talk about sustainability. How do we achieve sustainability? I have a whole number of slides that talk about that in our presentation. But CNU, Congress for New Urbanism, has established new standards for green building at the neighborhood scale. And I'll talk about that specifically a little bit later. And transportation, of course, plays a major role in sustainability. And then New Urbanism also has an arm that works to reclaim urban places once thought lost. And I thought you're probably all thinking, well, that's a very strange picture to have when we're talking about reclaiming urban places. But it's not just urban places. It's places that have existed over time and are in danger. And this barn is in Newtown, and it actually was rehabbed, much like this whole complex that we're in today, and taken care of, brought up to standards, and in the case of Newtown, a new farm was built around the existing farm. And then lastly, New Urbanism is for renewing ravaged regions, and they're best known for their work after the Katrina disaster in the Mississippi Renewal Forum, and they also worked hard as a team of planners in Haiti after the earthquake several years ago. So, the principles of New Urbanism are organized into 3 categories, and these slides are of St. Louis and the region, and you'll probably recognize that. First, there's the metropolitan region, and then there's the city region, and then there's the town region. And those three aggregates of scale represent the regional principles of New Urbanism. Then the second category is the neighborhood. And the neighborhood consists of a neighborhood, a district, and a corridor. And this is a slide from Google Earth of Newtown. This is actually my neighborhood in Newtown, showing the blocks and the way things are arranged. And then the third is actually zooming in on my block even closer. This is my house here. What is the character of that block? And what is the character of the street? And then what character should the buildings have? So all of those things. So we have the region, the regional view, we have the neighborhood view, and we have the block view. Those are the 3 categories. The neighborhood is the essential unit of measure for any kind of community. And they have identifiable areas that residents can specifically say, yeah, I'm going to meet you at this place or that place. And people have a pretty good idea where the boundaries between one neighborhood and the next neighborhood are. So, on to principles of New Urbanism from the neighborhood, district, and corridor segment of the 3 categories. Again, Newtown, and drawing from the original charrette of Newtown, showing the same piece of ground. But neighborhoods should be compact. This is what New Urbanism thinks. They should be compact, pedestrian-friendly, and a mix of uses. And so, corridors connect those neighborhoods together. Now, when you get to a neighborhood, there should be a center and an edge, etc. Many activities of daily living should occur in the community center, in the neighborhood center, allowing people who don't drive access to the same conveniences that people who do drive can take advantage of. The advantage of having this embedded in your community is it reduces the number of car trips that you're leaving from your house or your place of business. And so it saves energy on the scale of, when you compare Newtown to a typical suburban development, the number of trips out of the community is about 40% less. So of course people are leaving for their job, etc. But if you can go within your community to have a meal, to buy the essential staples at the market, things like have your haircut, those are trips that you don't have to take out of your community. They're very convenient within your community. Another principle is that there should be a broad range of housing types and price levels that can really bring people together, a variety of different types of people. And the best example of that is that many communities have a coffee shop, but can the person who is pouring the coffee afford to live in the neighborhood where the coffee shop is? Or do they have to ride the bus or drive to the coffee shop to serve the people who are able, thank goodness, to walk to the coffee shop? So the idea is that you have a mix of people all coming together. And to do that, you need a mix of housing types. And these are some of the housing types that are found in Newtown. Then there's a part of the principles that talks about transit corridors and how people get from their neighborhood to other places in the city. And urbanism is for those kind of connective tissues in the city. And then they also believe, we also believe, that appropriate building densities and land usage should be within walking distance of that transit that we're talking about. So we're looking down the line at 30, 40, 50 years from now, and cars will be potentially completely different than what we're dealing with now. Possibly electric cars, possibly cars that have a limited range, and the whole infrastructure of gasoline stations and things might change over the next 30 to 40 years. So by creating a community where you don't have to rely so much on the car, it's thinking to those times in the future when transportation will be more expensive. And then there should be concentrations of civic, institutional, and commercial activities embedded in the neighborhood, not isolated by a series of roads and things. And my best example of that are the institutions of churches, public schools, private schools, but also government places. This is Savannah. This is the Kentlands in Maryland. This is Newtown, St. John's.
Could you speak up just a little bit, please?
Sorry.
Thank you.
What is that building? Or just one of
This building is the chapel. That is a place that is leased to a congregation and also can be used for other activities, but it's primarily a religious building. The economic health of neighborhoods can be improved through a three-dimensional graphic code. I'm not going to talk about that in great detail, but these codes can be anything from suggestions to urban preferences, all the way through a zoning code. And this is a copy of our code at Newtown St. Charles that discusses how buildings are placed on the lot. And so there's, in addition to coverage and in addition to setbacks, we have things that require certain things, buildings to do certain things, like possibly need a building line, possibly create an overhang, possibly having to be 2 stories in certain districts or taller. So the zoning code for Newtown and also for Emerson dictates how that district will look from the beginning. There's also a principle that says that there should be a range of parks from the smallest tot lot to a village green, to ball fields, to community gardens, distributed throughout your neighborhood so that people have something in their neighborhood that is outdoor recreational type of use and helps to create a memorable area within the neighborhood. And then the primary task of all urban architecture is the physical definition of the streets and public spaces as places of shared use. And that's, when I talk about the architect, town architect, being the vision keeper for the community, I also want to say that as town architect, I speak for the public realm. So when there is a change that is to be taking place in the zoning or in the uses, etc., I consider what the town, for lack of a better word, would want, how the physical realm, the public realm would react to that. And I am charged with having changes to that public realm be harmonious. And those are really vague terms, but I kind of have to reason what is harmonious, and I have to give that reasoning when a change is warranted. So then, architecture should seamlessly link to its surroundings, and in the case of Newtown, the idea was to create an architecture that was regionally Missouri. So we started out by looking at historic places in Missouri, and later we branched out into other historic places. But the idea is that the buildings, if you're dropped from 40,000 feet with a parachute into Newtown and you look around, you might be able to, if you've been to St. Louis, guess that you're in the St. Louis metropolitan region. So, of course, New Urbanism is also talking not just about new places, but existing places, and looking at revitalizing urban places. And of course, safety and security is an important part of any public space. And so, one of the principles is that we create open environments that are visually open and create places where people can feel safe because there are lots of other people around them. So this is an early event in Newtown. It's grown up a little bit since then. And then this is interesting because this is actually, New Urbanism talks about adequately accommodating automobiles. And New Urbanists feel that over the course of the last 30, 40 years, designing for the car has actually taken precedence over designing for people, designing for pedestrians, designing for cyclists. And we're just trying to level the playing field so that cars are not the only thing that people who are in the civil engineering profession are thinking about, that they need to think about how the bike merges and crosses streets and how pedestrians work as well. So part of that is designing spaces where the car is not, it's clearly not necessarily just a car environment, but could be a pedestrian environment. This is behind the theater, amphitheater in Newtown, and the plaza extends across the street, and the paving from the plaza extends so that you end up, it's kind of an ambiguous space. It doesn't really feel like a road. Should I be driving there or not? The bollards keep people safe, but the idea is that people are on an equal footing with the automobile. Again, we were talking about public spaces that should be safe, but also comfortable and interesting. And so this is the first phase in Newtown, the first neighborhood to be built. This is the entrance roundabout, and then the chapel in the back. Part of the way we started to think about architecture in New Urbanism was to create iconic buildings that are from the place. And so two of the earliest structures were recreations of existing buildings that no longer existed, but had existed in St. Charles. In this case, this train station existed 7 miles from the Newtown site and was ruined in the 1993 flood. We reconstructed it and created an iconic building that has actually had a number of different uses over the 7 years that it's been in existence. And then we're talking again about civic buildings and public gathering spaces. They require important sites like the one that the chapel is on in Newtown. It shouldn't just be tucked away somewhere or hard to find. Civic places should really feel civic. And there's a lot of discussion and debate, and we can talk for a long time about what gives a civic building a civic presence. But one is definitely the siting of it. Does it terminate a street? Does it occupy a central corner? Is it visible from a lot of different places in the neighborhood? Those are all things that create a good site for a civic building. All buildings should provide their inhabitants with a clear sense of location and of time. One of the things in Newtown that we have encouraged is having a porch deep enough that you can furnish it and you can spend time with it. And even though porches kind of fell out of favor with the advent of air conditioning, there's still a civility to having a porch that you can hang out on. And this is one of the streets in Newtown where the porches kind of meander in and out. The corner, the porches wrap around the corner. These, about 10% of our residents right now really use their porch with the advent of Wi-Fi. They bring their computers out and use them. So there's still people who are addicted to their air conditioning and to their television. But because of the way Newtown is planned, which in terms of block structure have alleys and paths, it allows street frontages that have no garages. And when we talk about how a place can accommodate adequately an There's no reason why a car has to be on the front of your house. The car could actually be in the back quite nicely. And it creates a really nice pedestrian feeling when you're walking down the sidewalk. And over time, this is an older slide, these trees have grown up and provide shade. You'll see some newer slides a little bit later. And then when you can preserve and renew historic buildings, you should, and that helps with the continuity of the place you're trying to create. So, new urbanists have this tool, and the tool is called the transect, and it's borrowed from biology, but it basically is from one extreme to the other. And in the case of new urbanism, it runs from the most rural and remote land that has no buildings on it to downtown, wherever you are. And these are the 6 steps along the way of the transect. And every place, every region has these. And some of it's easiest to see in a small town. In a small town, you have the edge of town, you have kind of the roadside type architecture, then you have some architecture that was built most recently, and as you get closer and closer to the center, the architecture and the homes get older and older, and then you run into a commercial strip that every town is different, but every town has that kind of gradation from the most rural to the most urban. And so the transect is the basis for the zoning code in Newtown. And here's another way to look at it, and this talks about kind of how the landscape works from T1, which is rural, preserved, never to be built on. And then there's rural reserve, which would be like outside the growth boundary in Portland, where you have farms, and orchards, and things like that, farming. And you have T3, which is suburban, T4, general urban, urban center, urban core. And you can see the black indicate buildings, the round circles indicate trees, the roads are in white, and the character of all those 3 things changes from most rural to most urban. That's kind of the organizing principle that new urbanists have to use. And that indicates a whole list of different things that can be included in each zone. So in T1, there are no houses, there are no buildings. In T2, there might be a farmhouse. In T3, there's large estate homes, there's houses, but no apartments. Apartments get closer to the center, where there's transit, where there's mixes of uses and things like that.
What's D? Sorry.
What's D? D is a special district, and the best way to think about that is like Washington University is a district. And so it's all one thing, and it doesn't relate. It's all its own thing, but it's not private land with public streets. So our code has a variety of different graphics for, in this case, how the building meets the street gray, the building purple. The key thing is just that there are subtle differences in each zone as you're getting closer. And I'll illustrate that with a case study here in a minute. Part of the sustainability end of new urbanism includes something called light imprint new urbanism, which seeks to deal with stormwater through the use of rain gardens and permeable pavers, and a variety of different techniques that are less costly and more ecologically and environmentally sensitive. And there's a whole talk on light imprint, but I want to alert you to that for your municipality, because I think it's important, from the ecology and the quality of your water in your place and the energy efficiency, but it's actually developer friendly because the techniques don't necessarily add cost, they actually can be cheaper. In the case of Newtown, by spreading the lakes and water retention around, we were able to save a lot of money on large stormwater pipes that then had to be mitigated because the stormwater was collected and then had such a force that when it rained, you'd have to build structures to slow the water down. In Newtown, the water falls it percolates into the ground and ends up in the lakes and canals, more natural. So I want to bring that to your attention. Now I have 3 case studies. My first case study is a project that I was involved in as town architect in the Kansas City area, Liberty, Missouri. And this project never did get off the ground, but it was the second project after Newtown. So it was like Newtown 2.0, Newtown St. Charles. And the red kind of triangle piece is about 900 acres in Liberty. And the planning team for this was Dwani Platter Lieberg Company, which is the same planner that you designed Newtown St. Charles. This was the plan that they came up with. And this plan, although it seems a little bit random, is really arranged around the topography, which drops about 70 feet from high to low. And so it creates a center of town in the center. And then it gets more rural up above this road here. It's actually farms and large lot subdivisions. This is an interstate highway. It's bordered by, and this is a main arterial. I show this to you because of the images that are evocative of the kind of place that we were trying to create here. That is similar to perhaps some of the landscapes in town and country. Part of this, the part in the upper north section of the site, was to be platted as 5-acre farms. And this was a rendering that showed how those farm structures could work together to create a place, but like this was a fish farm, there were places for crops, but it's definitely the small scale organic artisan type of agriculture that we were talking about here, not the factory farm, if you will. This is on a piece of land that's about 30 acres, maybe 30 to 40 acres. This is a community area in T3, which is kind of on the edge of the town, showing the character of the houses, the large porches and the characters in Kansas City. The farm was supported by a green and an organic farm set of stalls. Part of creating community, it involves creating events for people to attend and things for people to do. It's not enough to have a walkable place that has sidewalks. Those sidewalks have to go somewhere interesting and to give people things to enjoy. So this was an example of a neighborhood green near those 5-acre farm sites. This is a little bit more urban, and here you start to have a character of row houses and attached houses served by alleyways. And because of the topography, there were specific sites that were set aside in this plan for civic buildings, in this case, a church up on the hill, overseen. It's another view of the neighborhood square. And this was a small neighborhood square that had a stage, but it was had attached type houses in kind of a randomized English countryside sort of way. Here's another neighborhood green. And this neighborhood green collected water for the neighborhood and had a small retention pond that actually worked for water quality as well. We have a series of ravines through the project, and so the connectedness of the greens through under streets and into greens, other greens, was important, illustrated here. And then the town center actually is looking about like this, and at the top is the plaza that has fountains and a large amphitheater. So that was kind of our Newtown Liberty project. This project is a built project also by DPE. This is in Abersham, which is outside of Beaufort, South Carolina. And this is, I give this because this is the best demonstration I have in a a few slides of the transect from the most rural to the most urban in a small town, hamlet kind of place. So this is at the edge of town. It's on the lowlands in South Carolina, so this is wetlands that is adjacent to the low country. And you can see the houses are very far apart and have a kind of rural character to them. Nothing in this community is more than 15 years old. As you go from this place towards town, the next step would be a place that has roads and has buildings on both sides of the street, but it allows things like mature trees to take precedence over the road. So it kind of is softer. This was blessed with great trees that was preserved. But as you see, there's sidewalks, but no curbs. The street kind of meanders. And then one step further, maybe another block or two towards town, you start to pick up curbs, you start to pick up on-street parking, and the houses get a little bit closer to the street. And then when you're almost to the town, you start to pick up this type of row house, Charleston-based architecture. And then at the town center, it looks like this. So that happens, that trip I just took you on is about a 15-minute walk from edge to this. And this is as urban as it gets in this place. So this would be T6 in Haversham. So lastly, I'm going to talk about Newtown St. Charles. This is the project I've had the most experience with and the most fun. Newtown was envisioned as a complement to historic Main Street St. Charles. One of the things that we looked at was, why is it that people in Newtown, or why is it that people don't want to live on Main Street? Can we create a place that is like Main Street, where people want to live? Some people live near Main Street, but they aren't building more of those type of Main Streets, so we wanted to try to go back and build more of that urban fabric. And we had to kind of reinvent everything in order to do this. So we started out and we had a field guide to American houses, and this is kind of like our architectural Bible for Newtown, which has all the accepted house styles through history in America. And you look at that very carefully. A lot of architects own this book and very few open it. So we use it, mine is very well thumbed. Use it as reference. We also had a book of inspiration, which was a book that was assembled of case studies and typologies of buildings like live works and banks, and single-family houses and row houses that would be given to architects to inspire them to do as good a job as the buildings that have lasted for many, many decades. So that was created. And then in February of 2003, we had a charrette. And a charrette, for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, is nothing more than a series of public workshops, usually held over a week to 10 days, where all the stakeholders involved in a certain project can get together, have meetings, discuss their hopes and their fears and the problems, and it's basically get everything out on the table. And then the designers start designing the place while those ideas are percolating in the room. So at the end of 10 days, this team of architects, engineers, city planners, traffic engineers, retail consultants, residential consultants, all got together, all worked together, which was really a great experience. And we created a town plan that ended up looking like this. And this is the Newtown of St. Charles. It's 750 acres. And I show this slide. The black area is the area that we've been building so far. So we've really been concentrating in building neighborhoods one at a time. So that's why the slides look like it's established, because in this area where I live, people have been living there for 7 years. The trees are getting mature. Things are looking like it's finished. In newer sections, not so much. So 20% of Newtown is usable open space. So right off the bat, 20% ended up having to be taken off for parks and for water retention. And there's a series of interconnected lakes that are stocked with fish that create a tremendous recreational amenity for people in Newtown, but they're not private. People can come in and enjoy them. It's open, they are open. And there's very little of the lake edge that's privatized. Almost all of it is public land right on the water. And then there's also smaller playgrounds and playing fields and things as well. Now, the shared parkland and the plazas help to give people options other than recreating in their yard. So most Newtown houses and dwelling units have a porch and an outdoor private open space. And the private open space is very secluded in most cases. So by fences and arbors and hedges to create that private open space. But then there's also this option of public open space within a couple blocks of almost every resident. The lakes capture the stormwater. And the thing about the lakes is that it places the ecological health of the community in the forefront of everybody's mind. And it helps, the lakes help lead you places. So you take a left and you have the lake on the right. It's an orienting device that is very helpful as well as quite beautiful. Then there is a network of narrow interconnected streets. The streets are based on the same street cross-section as historic portions of Main Street St. Charles, and not extra wide, so sometimes you have to pull over and let somebody go by. It slows people down, it slows traffic down, and that is based on a theory, or not a theory, on the fact that you're much more likely to survive and being hit as a pedestrian by a car if the car is going 25 versus 35. So when you drive home, I want you to drive 35. Don't feel like you're going very fast driving 35. The chances of, I think it's like 7 times more likely that you'll get killed at 35 as a pedestrian. So if slowing the car down is what we have to do to keep people safe and people pedestrian, to reinvent the pedestrian realm, that's what we're going to have to do. This is in phase 1 across the street from my house, and the deciduous shade trees provide passive shade in the summertime, and then they drop their leaves and they allow light to come through. These are concepts that as architects we study in school and then never really practice. Until we got to Newtown, I knew all this, but I wasn't allowed to do it. So it really functions quite nicely to have the street trees closely spaced and creating beautiful streetscapes out of very simple materials. So there's 6 planned neighborhood centers. This is our first neighborhood center. This is a more recent picture of the amphitheater. The town hall is over here. The mail center is here, and then our market is here. One of the interesting facts of Newtown is that no house gets their mail delivered to their house. You have to go into a center and get your mail, and so you can choose whether or not to pick up your stack of bills or catalogs. And what that does is that really cleans up the streetscape as far as the customized mailbox set that wants to outdo. You have a nice wrought iron mailbox. This person is building a castle that just so happens to have mail. This next person has a dolphin that picks up mail. This all clusters it in the center and forces people, when they get their mail, to come into town, which is the way people did many years ago. It's probably the most obvious retro piece of Newtown's mail collection. By the way, the mail post office loves it because they can do about 3 times the households, and they don't have to spend all day in a car. They They can be in an air conditioning space, it's great. Really each town center, each neighborhood center has a series of places for what we call third places, which is a place to congregate other than your work, other than your house. So it could be a wine bar, a restaurant, a coffee house. We have all of those in Newtown. Each community center will have, each neighborhood center will have those elements. Yes.
What are they called?
Third places. There is a book called Third Places, The Great Third Place. And it came out about 10, 12 years ago. So I encourage you to check that book out from the library. And then the other thing I just want to say is that it's really important to keep your eye. There's all these little details about engineering and architecture and street widths and arborists and all that. But all that has to come together to make a distinct place. And I really want you to think about another assignment for your drive home is think about the places that you go that make you feel really good. Those are the kind of places that we should be trying to continue to make and replicate. And I don't think that if you had a group of this size group, I think you could come up with a wide variety of places that make you feel good. But I think there'd be some commonality, and there'd be some things that would come out of it. And those are the kind of consensus things that happen in a charrette, where people come together and they kind of go, yeah, that's a brilliant idea, but we think about this as well. How do we build community? How do we get people out of their cars? How do we get people to know their neighbor better? So one of the details that is very interesting in Newtown is that the plan in the commercial areas has inside block parking lots. So the buildings, the commercial buildings are pushed out to the street. These are live works. They're pushed to the street. You have a parking lot that's shared. And instead of having every business having to have their number of spaces that they have to maintain, the community maintains this parking, and groups of uses that have different hours, like for example, this is the church, this is another church, this is the chapel, this is the church. They have a half-acre lot, and then there's an office building. They both share parking because there's never a congregation here when people are working in the office building. So just simple ideas about combining parking, shared parking, and then putting it all in the middle of the block and creating something simple so that this could, if over time we needed to, this could actually become a structured parking lot, with the parking tanks. So over time, this Newtown can change over and over. We feel that Newtown 50 years from now will be different than it is today. 100 years from now will be different. It will evolve. And the zoning allows for that. So there's some sustainability standards for commercial buildings I want to talk about. This is the office building I was just mentioning. We're encouraging durable materials like masonry and concrete. We design even office buildings with operable windows. When we moved to our new office in Newtown, the number one thing that people wanted, the number one thing was a window that they could have the breeze come through. Not so hard. Not so hard to do. Extra windows allow for less reliance on natural light. Look at this space. We have no lights on. It's lovely. A little glary maybe. Then the courtyard is paved with permeable pavers. When the rain comes down, it soaks right through the edges of those permeable pavers and down into the water table. So that's a sustainable example of how to build a sustainable office building, Newtown style. Not very radical, not very difficult, but a little different. Then we have the farm. There's the Newtown Farm. It's currently Glenmark Farm. It was built around that barn I was talking about. It was conceived as a regional source for information on local food production. Newtown exists in areas that are farmed, so it brings the actual neighbor neighboring uses into town. It's a local source for herbs, vegetables, eggs, and dairy. There is a neighborhood resource for gardening. I think I may have skipped by that picture, but there are garden plots that residents can rent, lease, to grow vegetables on their own. And at any rate, so the farm exists that way, and it's been a challenge to get that operational, but we have some great operators now that are moving forward with some great ideas. For each residential lot, this block represents some of the most high-end houses in Newtown. And I want to show you that private yards, there's a private yard here, private yard. These are the garages, these are the houses. This is a 5,000 square foot house on a 5,000 square foot lot, 4-car garage, a studio, a guest house, all on 5,000 square foot lot. So it's very compact, but it still can be grand. We eliminate sod, and we were the first community in St. Charles to have municipal recycling. So now all of St. Charles has it. We led the way. Then there's a whole bunch of sustainable standards for each house, and I'm not going to read through all these, but I will just hit the highlights. One is we have a variety of housing choices, which means that the person who wants to live in Newtown has their choice of the exact right size home for them. And I think that that's important, that we aren't building a place that has one type of home for one type of person at one income, but we do have a variety of housing types. And the differences, by the way, are only the size of the house and the size of the lot. The materials are the same, the principles are the same, a lot of the details are similar. The more expensive homes are a little bit more elaborate. But the basic commitment to quality materials is on every single house. Smaller houses on smaller lots require multiple stories. When you build 2-story houses, you end up with less impervious pavement and roof, so that when the rain hits it, there's more land to have it hit the ground and soak in. So the tighter you build things and the smaller increment you build things, the greener it gets from a roof water quality standpoint. And the quality building materials we talked about. If you go, we require a 30-year asphalt shingle roof instead of a 20-year. That just means that the landfills will fill up, a third less fast. Because, of course, we also encourage metal roofing. Metal roofing is a 50-year life, probably has a greater than 50 years. But including those materials in our palette allows us to be a lot greener than just building houses that get thrown away after 20 years. This siding is not vinyl, but it's a hardy material that is warranted for 20 years. It's pre-primed, and it can be repainted. So a re-siding is a lot farther down the road than when you have a vinyl sided. Building efficient floor plans with porches and exterior spaces allows the houses to get a little bit smaller. And the houses actually, on the average in Newtown, are about 2,000 square feet. And 2,800 square foot is like a mansion in Newtown. And partly it's because the lot sizes are smaller. So the house occupies more of the lot. And it just encourages people to be more thoughtful about spending their money. And I often, when I deal with clients, I ask them, what are the 3 to 5 things you want in your house? We're going to do everything possible to get those 5 things, but I'm not necessarily interested in the laundry list of 30 items that you think you need for resale, or because your neighbors have it. What's important to you? That's what you go into your home. Because I'm sure there will be other people who value that as well. Buildings are designed to minimize construction waste in Newtown. We use structural high joists and roof trusses that are built with sustainable lumber, recycled content materials. iJoyce have some recycled content materials and renewable lumber sources. Talked about roof shingles, talked about you can buy green things like high efficiency furnaces, you can buy tankless water heaters. Those are options at this point, but we like to encourage people to have those options. It helps make the house greener. We have wood windows with dual insulated argon-filled glass. And then the one thing that people don't really think about in terms of indoor air quality is the worst thing that you can put on your house is an attached garage, because every time you open the door, the fumes from your car get into your house. And so by just attaching it, it can be to just 10 or 20 feet. Even when it's snowing, you really don't melt walking outside for 10 or 20 feet. You have better indoor air quality. We encourage low VOC paints. All these are just minimal type of things. These are some of the renderings from Newtown. This is our team of professionals that help create Newtown. It takes a village of professionals, apparently, to build a village. This was the first project that the developer had tried to build of this style. As town architect, part of my job is fostering the idea of incubating businesses. This is Chuck Lupke of Studio Lupke and Dwellin Design. He opened up a business in a 12 by 16 kiosk. After a year or two, he moved to a larger space in our town center, in our neighborhood center. So you incubate spaces, people, you encourage them, you support them, and you help them to grow. It's really quite important. And to date, right now, there are 40 new businesses in Newtown. That wouldn't have happened at all if our zoning hadn't been written to include mixed use within our neighborhoods. Okay, as town architect, I specifically look for honest materials that have the look, feel, and sound of traditionally used materials. So, in other words, you don't have tile that looks like wood. You don't have vinyl that looks like wood. If it looks like wood, it's wood. It's kind of simple-minded thought, but it actually kind of makes sense from the standpoint of real places, patina, vinyl fences, vinyl siding, they don't patina, they don't age. They just kind of fall apart after a certain length of time. So we recommend those quality materials. Here we are at the very beginning when the first residents were about ready to move in. This is how it looked in about January of 2005. And this is what it looked like 3 years later. So in terms of diverse housing, these are some of the types that we have in Newtown. Oh, this is the neighborhood plots that people can lease to grow vegetables on. This is the farm. This is our neighbor over here. So we are in a farm area. In Newtown, we have people who live across the street from the farm, which is actually people really like that. That was an amenity that you only have to find like a dozen people who want to live next to the farm. But you can find those people. And in fact, one of the most heartfelt things was a couple that had a small girl, a daughter, who loved waking up to the rooster. And just, when you're like 3 or 4 years old, it's just magic to actually have that experience of living and going outside and going over and looking at the farm animals. It's really, it's not a factory environment.
What's the population of Newtown?
About 2,800 right now.
And what was it designed for?
We're about 20% built.
20%?
It's a very large project.
Okay.
I'm almost done. Am I out of time?
Yeah.
Oh, I am out of time. Okay.
It's been an hour. Gosh, we have more time. It's been an hour. If you need to go, please feel free to go. But as you heard, Tim's just about done, and then he'll be taking questions from anyone who has them. So feel free to go, feel free to stay.
Okay.
Do you have some brochures about Newtown?
I don't.
No?
There you can find online, if you
Uh-huh.
Google Newtown St. Charles, you can find a lot of information on it.
Okay.
If you come out, the sales centers have information. We're about to have our neighborhood newspaper, and it's not quite out. It comes out now, what is it, about biannually. But there is information that I just.
And where is it in relation again to downtown historic
It's
St. Charles?
about 2.5 miles north of Main Street, or
Okay.
2.5 miles north of Frenchtown, if you're familiar with St. Charles. It's off of 370.
Okay.
If you get on 370, there's an exit called Newtown Boulevard. Yes.
I've been to St. Charles, but it's been a long time because I just relocated back here, so I'm sure it's very different.
Have there been planned communities like that that have been adjacent to something existing? I mean, I think, wouldn't it be nice if Newtown were 2 blocks from downtown St. Charles? You know,
It would be that, I guess, every year I have a different thought that kind of becomes my mantra for the year, and this year is, I wish Newtown was closer to Main Street St. Charles.
right?
The issue is, the development team had never built this type of community before, and they wanted to start with a clean slate to learn how to do it. Now the development team knows how to do it, and they are looking for infill opportunities
Yeah.
throughout the region to do that very thing. The one issue with building in established areas is infill properties have a tendency to be owned by a lot of different people. And they end up, if you want to buy 30 acres of land, we're talking about densities of average of about 10 units per acre. So even 5 acres in downtown St. Charles is owned by lots of people. So assembly of the land is different. So, yes.
I noticed these homes are very close together, and apparently the structure or the materials are fireproof.
They are more than 5 feet apart, except for when they're row houses, and then they're joined with a 2-hour sound wall, but firewall.
Those are kind of concerned when a house caught fire.
They all meet code. They all meet the existing code.
And are they pretty well designed to withstand fairly strong pressure?
Yeah, they're lightweight structures, and they don't have a lot of point loads, which you really need to have the load spread out for earthquakes.
Police and fire, do you have your own police or fire, you subcontract that out? Or?
We annexed into the city of St. Charles, so we're actually part of the city of St. Charles. We were thinking about being our own municipality, but then we thought, well, there's 80-some municipalities in St. Louis. I'm like, well, maybe it's not so bad to be part of our neighbor. And so they really, and then the challenge was, the developer was a home builder, not somebody who was used to setting up governments and hiring police officers. And, that's a skill to have those city services.
Yeah.
So the city was very supportive of this community in St. Charles, and the mayor and the city council were very strong advocates for allowing us to build to the vision that is espoused by the Congress for New Urbanism without fail. So in our development agreement with the city, the developer said, if you start telling me to do things that are non-pedestrian friendly and not part of the new urbanism principles as published by the Congress for New Urbanism, we reserve the right to de-annex and do our own thing. We felt that strongly that the principles were worth following.
Do you have a firehouse close?
We are going to have a firehouse in the next year or two, right next door. Yes?
Will you, if people want to have solar panels on their roofs down the road, is there provision for that kind of design?
Yeah, that's part of what makes a town architect important, because we end up looking at how they impact the neighboring communities, and the neighborhood, we look at how they impact the neighborhood, and we are for that. So were for solar panels, wind generators. We had the first wind generator in St. Charles County at the farm. But the solar panel industry, there's a lot of, I don't know. I guess what I want to say is that I want to encourage people to have their solar and alternative energy needs met in a way that works in the community, so that it isn't like on the front of your house necessarily. If you can get away with putting it in the back, and they actually detaching the garages help,
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
because that allows you to have roofs that slope towards the backyard in both directions. So, yeah, we are encouraging that. Yes, sir.
Don't mean to be terribly crass here, but I'd be interested in knowing if you wanted to, in terms of the houses, lots of different kinds of houses, but you indicated that the materials that you use, and one of the reasons to develop vinyl that looks like wood is that it's less expensive. What's the range of prices? If you wanted to buy a place in Newtown, what would be the cheapest house you could get into? What would be the most expensive?
Well, on the cheapest house ever, the cheapest new house ever to be built in Newtown that was detached was $90,000. And we had condos at 110 that were attached. In fact, this project here is that condo project I'm talking about. Right now, today, one of my neighboring cottages is on the market for $119. That's for a detached 1,000 square foot cottage with a 2-car garage, and the house lot is 1,700 square feet. So, because of, when I say things get smaller, we can build things in Newtown that cannot be built anywhere else in St. Charles County in terms of the size. My house, for example, has a separate parcel for the garage. So my house is on one parcel, my garage is on a separate parcel. And that type of thing in conventional zoning makes the zoning administrator's head explode. Because what do you mean? The parking needs to be on the lot with the dwelling unit. Well, we said, why? Why do you have to do that? Why? And when you come to Newtown, if I give a tour, I'll show you what I'm talking about. It really is not any different than things that were built 80 years ago. It's really just a loosening up and an idea that maybe you can say yes sometimes to certain things that conventionally you haven't said.
You missed this high-end question.
Oh, the most expensive house that sold in Newtown was just under $1 million.
About 5,000 square foot.
Yeah. So that's the range, from 100 to $1 million. But the bulk of the houses are in the 200 to 300 range. Yes, I'm going to go this way.
Where do the children go to school?
That's a great question, and that's the short answer is Orchard Farm Elementary. A little bit longer is that that's a rural school district that recently built an elementary school not too far from Newtown. But kids do have to ride the bus, unfortunately. Yes.
Yeah, and what incentives do you offer for businesses to open and secure a tax base there?
We don't offer incentives except for the fact that we have small spaces that are really unheard of in other places. So we have a space that starts out at 250 square feet, but we have a number of spaces at 600 square feet, 1,000 square feet, 2,500 square feet. So it isn't so much that there's incentive as that just as in the houses, you can get the building that you need and not more than you need. You can do that. You can do that in Newtown and have a smaller business. Other than that, there is also a great organization of business owners called the UCBA, the Urban Community Business Association, who work together to sponsor events and be part of the community. And they sponsor things like the Adult Easter Egg Hunt, which is on Holy Saturday. We also have trick-or-treating and Easter things. There's events that they put on. Yes.
So I was wondering, with this being a more rural version of the urbanist principles, how do you really bring people into the community for it to be economically sustainable?
That sounds like a thesis question in the nation. And I would say this, and that is that it's an experiment in a sense that we generate tourism, oddly, because we're so different. So we have people every weekend coming to see it in Newtown. So the businesses, especially in the summertime, really appreciate you coming out. There is a series of events, including this Saturday would be an excellent time to visit Newtown. This Saturday at 7 is our reggae concert in the amphitheater, and that is paid for. I would be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about how you pay for things. That is paid for by a 0.5% sales tax on anything that you buy in Newtown that goes to the events to help pay for, offset the cost of events. And that generates about $6,000 to $8,000 a year, which is enough to have 3 or 4 concerts and some movies. And it's very low-tech, small-town scale. I'm going to come up to you, but yes, sir.
Dr. Mason?
Yeah.
The principle you talked about earlier about the need for different kinds of housing in communities seems to apply really directly to town and country. I mean, when people age beyond the point where they no longer want a house on an acre of land, they shouldn't have to leave the community. And I just wonder how much communities like this are kind of waking up to these principles.
I think that is an excellent case. Another example of communities not providing for their own is when kids go off to college, and when the kids come back, can they afford to live in your community?
Right.
I mean, in St. Charles, most of them come back and live in the basement of their parents' house, and because there isn't that infrastructure of dignified, smaller starter houses that our parents and our grandparents had access to. And so I think people are waking up, and I have to tell you a really interesting phenomenon that has happened in Newtown. We noticed this in a subdivision we built about 10 years ago, where there was one street that had really elaborate homes. People would buy the biggest house and build all the options. And we were like, why is this happening on this one street? And it turned out that these were people who wanted to live close to their kids who had their grandkids. And they didn't want to live in a place where you had to drive to the grandkids. And so that we kind of started to think, well, that's interesting. And then in Newtown, we started out, we had a little area for seniors to live. And the seniors liked being integrated with the rest of the people in Newtown. But they appreciated the fact that the units that they live in were just enough for them to take care of and to live. And our oldest resident is 80, over 80 now, I think. And he still goes to the fitness center, and he's an active 80-year-old. The thing that is one of the most rewarding aspects of Newtown is there are families of multiple generations that are related, living in separate households within a couple block area. And so in one case, one family has 7 households. And what that does is that creates a network of infrastructure, social infrastructure for taking care of grandkids and daycares not being needed, kids getting dropped off with their grandparents. That is really wonderful. I'm not from St. Louis, and it took me a while to figure out St. Louis. I've lived here 18 years, but one of the facts that I really appreciate about St. Louis is that this was about 10 years ago, of the top 50 cities in America, the place that more people stay their whole life. They're born and raised and stay. St. Louis was number one. And so people are intensely family oriented here. And even the kids, I mean, ask the people who have kids who moved away, the kids move back. And it's that infrastructure of parents and friends that really makes St. Louis a wonderful place. And I think that we need to build communities that understand that and support that. So that's my little soapbox for that. Yep, in front. Yes.
You may need an hour to answer this question.
I might.
But the question is, how successful business is in town? In other words, is it making money for Whitaker or not, or how? I don't know how easily you can answer that question.
I can answer that in a couple minutes. When Newtown opened, it was by far the most successful community Whitaker had ever opened, by 10 times. We had a waiting list. We had people who were willing to wait 2 years to live there. We sold over 400 homes in 4 months. We had tremendous momentum, and I have to say that I'm very fortunate as a town architect to be able to have built that much before the Great Recession hit.
Yeah.
The Great Recession has devastated home building. Home building as we know it is no more. And before the recession, Newtown was confirmed as being the best-selling new home community in over 16 states and 17,000 new home communities in the Midwest and South. It was that successful. We have continued to build houses, although not nearly at that pace, but we're right now having a resurgence where we probably have 30 homes under contract to build between the various home builders. It continues to have lasting success in a market that is awful. And I would say the reason for that is it offers people an option that no other place offers. And that is, you can walk in, if you can afford to buy a house or get a loan for a house, you can live in Newtown. It's really affordable. And that actually is one of 2 legacies of Newtown. I just spoke at the 20th anniversary of the Congress for Urbanism down in West Palm Beach, and we are known for being by far the most affordable new urban project in the country. And we're also known for having some of the most lovely public spaces. And I would say that those aren't going away. I think Newtown is a fantastic place, and I think that it will come back. It's stronger than anything else that I see in the community. I have a phone call to our market research guy I have to return. I should have returned that this afternoon. But things are looking good for it. And I think that if you do a multiple listing search in St. Charles, you used to have 2 options. You could buy a historic home in a historic area, or you could buy a suburban house with a 3-car garage on the front. Now you go into MLS and there's a 3rd type, and Newtown isn't. So there are people who want to have the charm of an old house, but not necessarily the old house construction issues. Yes?
What do people do for regular grocery shopping? They
Well,
have to go out to the town to...
the market is incredible. When you come to Newtown, you come to the market. I did a test the first 4th of July. I had 30 people over to my house, and I bought everything at the market. So you can do that. If you can't, then you end up having to go out of the community and you stock up. So you try to buy the staples, the bread, the milk, the meat at the market. They have fresh produce, but the produce doesn't turn over so fast. So it needs to be supplemented with farmers markets and things. But that's a challenge that as we get more people, the market will have the ability to have better things longer. Yes?
So if I was interested in either building or buying, what if I was interested in buying something that was already built, are there those choices available?
Yep. Yep.
Or to have something built?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. All of that. Yes.
Mark was kind of saying rental households would be in greater supply, especially with a lot of young professionals and trouble with down payments and all that stuff. Are there any rental places?
There are as designated apartments, there are over 150. Other houses, like in smaller houses, a lot of them have turned to the rental market. So there are a lot of opportunities for places to rent. There's also something that is built into our code that I would encourage Town and Country to look at is the idea that you can build a granny flat or an accessory unit over a garage. You can do that anywhere in Newtown. There are 3 right now that exist, but you can later on build that.
Is there any like cooperative laundry services where, I mean, do people just have their own units in their houses?
Yeah.
There's not
Every unit has their own laundry.
And then what about landscaping? Is that managed or cared for by individual homeowners?
Yes, except for the greens like the lakefront.
Right.
So, but you are responsible for maintaining from the curb your entire lot.
Okay.
But the greens are maintained.
What about like, are there any cooperative gardens or cooperative babysitting? Any kind of, you know, community?
Well, these, often you get people who go in, or have 2 or 3 plots next to each other, so you take turns watering.
Okay.
There's a business started by a college-age kid to mow lawns in Newtown. I'm anticipating in 15 years that the house painting business will be big. So if you have somebody who likes to paint, have them keep Newtown in mind. But there is that type of spirit, but I think it takes a little bit more critical mass of residents.
I'd like to break in here and thank everybody for coming. We have taken a video of this. It will go up on YouTube. The 3 prior Green Speaker talks are on YouTube. I encourage everyone to look more into new urbanism. I never dreamed I would get excited about urban planning, but I'm excited about new urbanism. And it certainly is worth a trip to Newtown to see what it's like. I don't know about you guys, but all the neighborhoods that we saw tonight look like neighborhoods I'd love to live in. If you have a question for Tim, please feel free to approach him. He'll stick around. But let's give him a warm thank you.